Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is market historian Bob Hoye. He's the chief investment strategist for chartsandmarkets.com. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Yeah, hi, Jim. Our Friday morning bit here, and I was looking at a headline earlier today, and it was the vacant land myth, whereby those who are determined to have all of the power generated by windmills and solar cells, well, it's a very low-density energy system, and it takes huge amounts of land. So this is the vacant land myth. They think that there's always going to be enough land. But I read elsewhere that if you did go to something like 90% renewables with these two main ideas, you would cover the U.S. and Canada from one end to the other, and it would still not work at nighttime. So anyways, it was a low-profile story, and it's not been widely reported, that a number of states and municipalities and counties are beginning to resist this in what they call flyover land in the middle, and which is great. I mean, that's legitimate. You can resist some people coming in and forcing their ideas on you, and yet the other side, with liberals on the West Coast and liberals on the East Coast, of course, there are potential petroleum reserves there, won't allow drilling, and yet California has been an important producer ever since the 1920s. And then you've got in Canada here, the West Coast protesters, no pipelines because they don't want to have any additional number of oil tankers going along the pristine waters of the Pacific. And yet you get out the East Coast and, Ontario, Canada, they're resisting a pipeline from Alberta to the east. And where do the East Coast get their crude from? Oh, out there, Venezuela and whatnot. So a pipeline in Canada to the East Coast would reduce the number of oil tankers sailing on the pristine waters of the Atlantic. So just these 3 points, Jim, and you wonder if there's any common sense anywhere. But when I looked at this headline about a not widely reported resistance developing against acres and acres, let's say square miles of solar cells which get dusty, and windmills that rely on wind, it's healthy to see common sense arising there, and I'm certainly going to watch it over the next little while because, when you've been in the financial markets for a very long time, and of course we use technical and historical stuff, but you also have an intuition where something seems to be starting. And for me, I think the whole promotion of windmills and solar cells and righteousness is about to collapse. I think the public's going to say, this is nonsense. So, Jim, can we call it a new bull market for common sense?
Well, one source of energy that nobody's really using a lot is tidal power. And with Vancouver Island in the way, BC's coast would be great because the tide doesn't all happen at once. It happens at different times along the coast. How come nobody's doing anything on that?
Well, I think they tried some of this on the Atlantic province. There's one place there.
The Bay of Fundy.
Yeah, where they get a huge tidal bore that comes and goes. And I don't think anything earth-shaking has come out of it. You can put in, but I think you have to have a special circumstance, and that's probably the best location for one. And you have to have a tremendous flow in order to make it work. So and you can't have one of those in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. So.
Oh, what? The tides of Moose Jaw are famous. You know that. I live there. Come on. We go down to the tidal flats and watch the orcas frolic amongst the cod and salmon. Bob, so with people now taking a look at what's going on with the price of oil, speaking of energy, it's been, I think, extremely strong over the winter after that big drop late in the fall. Is this going to continue?
Well, yeah, into May, perhaps. Of course, our work, we noticed in August that an old seasonal pattern was maybe coming in, whereby you could have a high for crude in late September or early October, and the high was October 3rd. And then, of course, we just fell back that every year, so to speak, you can have an important low for crude in December or January. This year, I know that we put out a piece on December 26th where crude oil and the S&P were both, giving technical buys at that low. And then the next step is you figure out, okay, how far can this go? And an easy one is out to March. You can often have a nice copper rally out to March, that sort of thing. So, we're still close to March, but for the last 3 weeks we've been writing that our target has been met, crude up until March, but we think it can go a little further yet, but it's now registering some technical alerts on this. So you're looking at, one is a window of time, and you're also looking at a condition, and the condition is overbought. So somewhere within the next few weeks, crude oil could roll over. At this moment, we'd call it a correction. And with that, you could also see because the ups and downs in the stock market and crude are pretty close together, because crude going up says there's prosperity, and when somebody's saying there's prosperity, somebody else will mark up the stock prices. So, yeah, so that's crude, and then quite likely the base metals have accomplished their best. And so what we're going to do, what we did last year, was the positive things can perhaps run into May, and then somewhere after mid-year you can have a seasonal change to weaker commodity prices or industrial commodities, and a change in the yield curve and a change in credit spreads to adversity. It's the same old story. Sell in May and go away. But what we've added to it is the ability with the technical research to catch the overboughts and the oversolds. And it's amazing how seasonal forces will play out year after year, sometimes very minor and sometimes major. So the way to look at it is, if you were in a hugely speculative stock market, the seasonal changes are going to be noticeable. So we'll continue to monitor for change.
We'll have more with Bob Hoye right after this.
I'm Douglas Mason, CEO of Naturally Splendid, symbol NSP on the TSX Venture Exchange. Naturally Splendid is a biotechnology and consumer products company focused on the global cannabis and health markets. Naturally Splendid is expanding distribution in this rapidly growing market with products currently in Canada, the USA, South Korea, Germany, and Australia. To view our comprehensive company presentation and for more information, please visit our website at naturallysplendid.com.
MGX Minerals is revolutionizing the new energy economy with patented lithium extraction technology, replacing traditional solar evaporation using low-cost, low-energy nanofiltration. The first system of this paradigm shift technology is currently being commissioned. MGX Minerals trades on the CSE, symbol XMG, the OTCQB, symbol MGXMF, and Frankfurt, symbol 1MG. For more information, visit our website, mgxminerals.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Hoye. Bob, we saw a record amount of stocks bought back over the last few months. Do you think that's going to continue?
Oh, boy, that's something, because you've had these stock buybacks, and unfortunately the way the markets are set up, and you had a long period where earnings were really not advancing that well, and you had, through the same period, unusually low interest rates for corporate borrowing. So then the game started, and I'll call it financial engineering, whereby the company borrowed money at a low rate and bought their stock out of the market at relatively high valuations. That reduced the number of shares outstanding, which apparently increases the earnings per share. Everybody knows that it's fiddling, but hey, it makes stocks go up. So, or it helps add to the rising stock market. And then, of course, you then had the Reformation with Trump attempting to lower interest or lower tax rates, and also to make it more attractive for investing within the United States. So a lot of corporate money that was parked offshore came back to the United States, and the habit was there. You've got, big brokers advising corporate treasurers, and oh yes, let's buy more stock. So then it has continued, and it will continue so long as the strategy is seen to be successful. And then at some point, the stock market can roll over, and then the strategy will seem to be unsuccessful, and then there may be some resignations at high levels in various companies. But there's always been a reason for companies to buy stocks. You go to the 1920s, and they were pyramiding up, and you buying utilities. Like there was one, can't remember his name, but one guy was heading up like a conglomerate of utility companies, and so long as it worked, it was great. And then all of a sudden, boom, it was over. So you companies who are doing this are not doing it to expand their business. They're doing it to drive the stock price up, and that is promotional. It's speculative, and it is not healthy. Business should tend to business, and the financial markets will put the appropriate appraisal on that stock. And I think there's nothing like a good bear market to clear this one, because you had back in the late 80s with Japan, who had a financial miracle going on, and their upper echelon of policymakers called MITI, M-I-T-I, were considered genius, and the stock guys were getting virtually zero cost money, and it was a huge bubble, and then whoosh, it was over. So this is a similar financial engineering that was being done in Tokyo in the late 80s, and they called it in Japanese terms Zytec, and it's just plain financial engineering. So why don't we call stock buybacks just another example of Zytec?
Well, of course, a study was just done. I think it might have been published in the Wall Street Journal. I'm not sure. But it just said if you made stock buybacks illegal again, like it used to be back in the 70s, it would cause such a huge crash in the market, you would probably trigger some kind of recession or depression.
Yeah. You're going to get a bear market anyway. So, on this one, politicians and bureaucrats should just stay out of it. Whatever they mess around with things, whatever is going on is made worse, and you could never actually have a free market. But the less regulations you have, the better it'll be. But what's going to happen here is, was like with the 2008 crash, all of the Democrats and Liberals then said, it was due to getting rid of regulation, which did happen in the 1990s, reduced regulation as part of a step towards more freedom. But there's no amount of regulation that will prevent a bear market or an economic contraction. And what happens is, I would suggest, is that when you've got like the Bank of Canada or the Federal Reserve System, the original thought behind those was that let's just stay with the Fed, early 1900s. They had noticed that if you have a financial setback, you will then have a recession. So then the notion behind the Fed in 1913 was that as a lender of last resort, it would prevent setbacks, financial setbacks, and then preventing those would then prevent recessions. Great theory. But if you look at the history, the National Bureau of Economic Research keeps track of recessions and expansions, and there's been 18 recessions since the Fed started business in 1914, and the mission was, or part of the mission was, to prevent recessions. So anybody with a physics background is going to say, not working, and but yet they continue to think it will work. So, and it will be seen to work until there's a bear market. The theory of buying back stock will be celebrated until it's seen not to work, and unfortunately, that's the way the market's going to work.
We'll have more with Bob Hoye right after this.
Grand Portage Resources recently completed the 2018 drill program on its 100% controlled Herbert Gold Discovery property located in the prolific Juneau Belt in southeast Alaska. Drill results are expected through late 2018. Past drill results included numerous multi-ounce gold assays on multiple veins. Grand Portage trading symbols are GPG on the TSX Venture, GPTRF on the OTCQB, and GPB on Frankfurt. For more information, please visit our website, grandportage.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Hoye. Bob, Ontario is going to give business owners a break. Is they're going to allow more of a capital write-down if you start a business or reinvest in the business that you have. A lowering of taxes, is this something that more places in Canada need to see? Oh,
yeah. The governments have, over the last 100 years, become predatory. It's one of those things. You just get a madness going, and the work that I've done, 30 years ago, noticed that in the 3rd century in Rome, the bureaucrats went crazy, and you ended up with an extremely authoritarian government, price and wage controls, the New Deal in old Rome. They were going to run everything. And it was, of course, became a military dictatorship, but it also became a welfare dictatorship, because in the city of Rome itself, they had almost half the population of almost 1 million people were on welfare. So, I mean, so the welfare state did in the military state, and you had a long, let's call it a reform. Then the next expansion of aggressive government began in around 1500 and ran for about 125 years, when, under the same ambitions and coercions to run everything, and also the government wants to have all the money, that then collapsed the economy. Excuse me. And you had on the religious side, they call it the Protestant Reformation, but essentially it was everything was reformed. Every one of these pushy and intruding institutions, government agencies, was looked at and bypassed or reformed. And it's interesting reading to follow the Great Reformation in England. It was more successful than in Europe. And the public, it was just, right now, Jim, it's the same thing. In your face government, and in your wallet government. And we pay our governments to intrude in our life and tell us what to do. It's absolutely absurd. But it's like a market. The tide can change on this. And I think in the next contraction, folks are going to look at the promises of central bankers and say, hey, you guys are idiots. It's not working. And then the other one, of course, will be the most incredible ambition of all, which is the notion that a committee on Earth can manage the temperature of the nearest planet. I mean, I've never heard anything so absurd in all my life. So then, as the climate does what it does, and perhaps we're into a few years of cooling trend recently, the public are going to look at this and realize that how much money the bureaucrats are taking and wasting on fiddling around promoting absurd ideas about that they can manage the temperature of the Earth. Jim, it really is absurd. So we live in very interesting times. So if you get a recession, and when you've had a crazy boom, it always, the end of it anticipates a recession, and that then puts a light on the boast that they can manage the economy and prevent recessions. And then if you do get a little more continuation of cooling, then that'll put paid to the idea that there is an urgent necessity of a bunch of busybodies to take money from you in order to change the climate. Again, Jim, it's absurd. So anyways, it's great to be vertical and alert in these times, because there's been nothing like it in 400 years.
Well, Bob, I read a report that said the one country that will benefit the most if we have global warming is Canada, because it will reveal all these natural resources that were under an ice cap.
Well, Canada could do with a little more warming, but you know, they get it backwards. Throughout history, the major migrations of people, like the Mongols and the Huns out of the Great Plains of Asia, were driven by cold weather. The great die-offs of all kinds of species in history have been caused by cold weather. Species just don't like to live where it's unpleasant. And whereas in ages past, the Earth's temperature has been very much higher, well, even just 8,000 years ago, coming out of the last ice age, which was at its worst about 15,000 years ago, and then it started to warm up due to natural reasons. And then in the early part of the Holocene, it was really warm, a whole lot warmer than recent, and life did well. So it's cooling trends that are bad, warming trends are good, and the idea that the warming that came out of the Little Ice Age, which reached its coldest in the 1680s, and people consider that the Little Ice Age ended in the mid-1800s, the warming since has been natural and tied to increasing solar activity. And then for the last decade, the solar activity has been turning to a weakening solar history. Perhaps we could go into a grand minimum, but we don't know yet. But the reason for the warming out of the Little Ice Age some 400 years ago was increasing solar activity, and that solar activity is now decreasing. So this is where I'm confident that we're early stages of a turn to cooling, and that's not going to be so pleasant. Look at across the continent in February and March, unusually cold. Late spring, unusually severe snowstorms and stuff like that. So in parts there have been some unusual cool, but let's admit it, Jim, what I've just mentioned is weather. But when you look at the way the solar system's working, it could be a change to a cooling trend that could last for more than just a few years.
And of course, the dinosaurs that lived in northern Alberta were in subtropical conditions. I guess it was caused because they drove their cars too much.
Well, the formation of oil deposits is in ocean bottoms, sedimentary stuff, and little critters that only exist in kind of warm, not deep oceans. And of course that was the case over much of what is Alberta and Saskatchewan, all out there, millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago, it was ocean. And then you had ice ages, and now we're in an interglacial. Well, it's fascinating, and when I did my degree in geophysics a long time ago, there were basically two theories. One was that, and at the time lecturers were quite concerned about ice ages. That was the concern. And they had a theory that you needed an open ocean because it needed the precipitation. You needed the moisture to precipitate out. So they dreamt up this idea that you had the Arctic Ocean open, and somehow the continent would be cold so that the moisture would precipitate out as snow, and then the snow built to a couple of miles deep, and then the ice spread out and all the way down to Chicago where it melted. But at the time I thought, I don't know, I can't see that idea. And then the other one that was taught to us was Milankovitch theories, whereby it's due to all the changes due to the amount of energy received at the Earth's surface, and that varies according to distance from the sun, angle of the sun, and all this sort of stuff. But at the time, there was no way, there was not enough evidence to prove either theory. And then with satellites and measurements, and then you had all sorts of drilling of ice cores and drilling of coral reefs and drilling of old lake bottoms, then you built a climate history, a temperature history, and it fits the Milankovitch theory, which is straight orbital mechanics having nothing to do with CO2. So as a formerly young student and now a aging older student, it's been very rewarding to watch all of this come together and confirm a theory that was laid down in the 1920s. very exciting stuff if you have a geological background and you realize that generally things happen pretty slowly. And then also with the financial history I've done, it's fascinating to recognize a great promotion when you see one. And of course the promotion has been one that an inspired committee can manage a national economy when there is no such thing as a discrete national economy. And then the other one is really extravagant, and that is that they can set the temperature of the nearest planet. So we can watch this, and I'll be watching it, Jim, and it's so exciting to be, as I said, watching this with a background of science on a degree taken. Well, I'll give you the date, 1962. That's a long time ago.
Bob, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Well, we got into a few subjects today, but I enjoyed it and look forward to next week.
My guest has been market historian Bob Hoye. He's the chief investment strategist for chartsandmarkets.com. If you have any questions for Bob, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet, our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. And Bob Hoye's fans should note that we'll be doing next week's show on Wednesday due to the Easter long weekend. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.